From the year 1986 and 2021, America executed 15 rapists on death row history. In this video, we'll examine their crimes, final meals, and last words that echoed through the chambers. This is Crime and Silence Records. William Emmett LaCroix. State of execution, Georgia. On 2001, William Emmett LaCroix kidnapped 30-year-old Joan Lee Teasler in Georgia, drove her to a secluded area, and raped and murdered her. The victim's body was found in the woods, and the crime became one of the most chilling in the region. LaCroix was arrested after DNA evidence linked him to the crime. He later confessed to the rape and murder, providing key details about the crime that matched the evidence found at the scene. The DNA evidence was crucial in connecting him to the victim and the crime scene. During the trial in Georgia, LaCroix was convicted of capital murder and sentenced to death. His defense team argued that he suffered from mental health issues, but the jury deliberated and handed down the death sentence. LaCroix spent over a decade on death row, where he displayed relatively quiet behavior. There were no significant incidents or personal transformations reported during his time in prison. Although his defense team claimed he had mental illness, there was no clear evidence of remorse for his actions. On September 22, 2020, LaCroix was offered his final meal. He requested a hamburger, fries, and a soda. He spent his last hours in solitary confinement, and there were no notable visitors before his execution. LaCroix was executed by lethal injection at the Georgia State Prison on September 22, 2020. He died at 9 p.m. LaCroix's final words were, "I'm sorry for the pain and suffering I caused. I hope you can find peace." Christopher Villalva. State of execution, Texas. In 1999, Christopher Villalva was involved in the carjacking, kidnapping, and murder of a married couple, James and Beulah Mueller, in Fort Hood, Texas. Villalva and accomplice Tyrus Howard forced the Muellers into their vehicle, drove them to a remote area, and executed them in a cold-blooded manner during a robbery that went wrong. The crime was particularly brutal due to the vulnerability of the couple and the lack of remorse shown by the perpetrators. Villalva and Howard were arrested shortly after the crime. They both confessed to the murder, although Villalva later claimed his confession was coerced. Forensic evidence, including bullet casings and DNA, was presented during the trial, linking them to the crime scene. The trial in 2000 resulted in Villalva being convicted of murder. His defense argued that he should not receive the death penalty, citing his troubled upbringing and mental health issues. Despite this, he was sentenced to death, and his appeals were unsuccessful. Villalva spent time on death row, where his behavior was described as relatively calm, with no significant incidents. Despite claims from his attorneys that he had found faith, there were no notable personal transformations or displays of remorse. Villalva's mental health history was debated, but he showed little to no remorse for his crime. On September 24, 2020, Villalva requested a cheeseburger, French fries, and a chocolate milkshake for his final meal. He spent his last hours receiving visits from his legal team and spiritual advisors, but there were no significant actions or statements from him during these visits. Villalva was executed by lethal injection at the federal penitentiary in Terre Haute, Indiana, on September 24, 2020. He was pronounced dead at 8:47 p.m. His final words were, "I'm sorry for what I've done, and I hope that you guys are able to find peace." Lesmond Mitchell. State of execution, Arizona. In 2001, Lesmond Mitchell was convicted for the brutal murders of a grandmother, Thelma, and her 9-year-old granddaughter, Talia, on the Navajo reservation in Arizona. Mitchell and his accomplice, an unnamed co-defendant, abducted the victims, then drove them to a remote area on the reservation. Mitchell brutally stabbed both victims, killing them before leaving their bodies in a secluded location. The crime was especially disturbing due to the vulnerability of the victims, an elderly woman and a young child. The brutality of the attack, including the stabbing of both victims, added a profound emotional weight to the case. Mitchell was arrested after evidence linking him to the murders was discovered. He later confessed to the crime and implicated his co-defendant, who was also arrested. The confession played a pivotal role in securing his conviction. Physical evidence found at the crime scene, including a vehicle traced back to Mitchell, and witness testimony further supported the case against him. Mitchell's trial took place in 2003. He was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. The jury debated his age at the time of the crime and the influence of his co-defendant, but ultimately sentenced him to death. During his time on death row, Mitchell was noted for his calm and composed behavior. There were no major incidents during his incarceration. While he expressed remorse, he did not show significant personal transformation or engage in advocacy efforts. His mental health was not a central issue in his case. In his final hours, Mitchell requested a meal of steak, a baked potato, and a salad. He received visits from his legal team and spiritual advisors, but no notable statements or actions occurred during these visits. Lesmond Mitchell was executed by lethal injection at the federal penitentiary in Terre Haute, Indiana, on August 26, 2020. He was pronounced dead at 6 p.m. His final words were, "I apologize for the pain and suffering I've caused. I hope you can find peace." William Clyde Gibson. State of execution: Indiana. In 2002, William Clyde Gibson was convicted for the murder of a woman named Christine Whitus in Indiana. Gibson lured Whitus to his home, where he killed her. Her body was later discovered in a wooded area. Initially, Gibson claimed he murdered Whitus in a fit of rage, but further investigation revealed his actions were part of a disturbing pattern of violence and misogyny. The crime was particularly shocking due to Gibson's violent tendencies and the brutal method of the killing. His lack of remorse and his history of similar behavior added emotional weight to the case. Gibson was arrested shortly after Whitus' body was found. His confession was pivotal in securing his conviction. Although he initially claimed the murder was a result of a heated argument, further investigations uncovered disturbing details, including Gibson's prior violent acts against women. The prosecution presented forensic evidence, DNA samples, and Gibson's own admission of guilt during the trial. The investigation also revealed his involvement in other violent acts, reinforcing the case against him. The trial took place in 2003, and Gibson was convicted of first-degree murder. His defense argued that his actions were influenced by his personal history, but the jury found this insufficient to overcome the charges. Gibson was sentenced to death, and his conviction was upheld on appeal. During his time on death row, Gibson was noted for being calm and composed, with no significant incidents reported. However, his behavior reflected the violent tendencies he displayed during the crime. Gibson did not undergo personal transformation while incarcerated. He did not show remorse for his actions and made no notable efforts toward rehabilitation or redemption. In his final hours, Gibson requested a steak, fries, and a soft drink for his last meal. He received visits from his legal team and spiritual advisors, but no significant statements or actions were made during these visits. William Clyde Gibson was executed by lethal injection at the federal penitentiary in Terre Haute, Indiana, on May 9, 2019. He was pronounced dead at 6:52 p.m. His final words were, "I'm sorry for what I did, I've hurt a lot of people." Alfred Bourgeois. State of execution: Texas. In 2004, Alfred Bourgeois was convicted for the brutal murder of his 2-year-old daughter, Maya, in Texas. Bourgeois was accused of subjecting the child to severe abuse, including physical assaults that caused blunt force trauma to her head and abdomen. Although the exact method of death was unclear, it was attributed to the severe and prolonged nature of the abuse. The case shocked all those involved due to the extreme violence and the young age of the victim. The crime was especially disturbing due to the victim's age. Maya was only 2 years old, and the fact that the perpetrator was her father. The brutal nature of the abuse, coupled with the emotional impact of a father harming his own child, added to the heaviness of the case. Bourgeois was arrested shortly after his daughter's death. Initially, he denied any involvement, but later confessed to the crime during interrogation. However, his confession was inconsistent and filled with contradictions, leading to claims from his defense team that the confession had been coerced. Despite this, Bourgeois' confession, combined with physical evidence, played a central role in his conviction. The prosecution presented compelling physical evidence, including medical records that showed the severity of Maya's injuries. Expert testimony from forensic pathologists confirmed that the injuries were consistent with blunt force trauma, strengthening the case against Bourgeois. Bourgeois' trial took place in 2005, where a jury convicted him of first-degree murder. The defense argued that Bourgeois suffered from mental illness and had a history of substance abuse, which may have influenced his actions. However, the jury found these claims insufficient and sentenced him to death. Bourgeois appeals over the years were unsuccessful. During his time on death row, Bourgeois was described as calm and composed, with no significant incidents or disruptions. Despite expressing some remorse for his actions, Bourgeois did not engage in efforts toward rehabilitation or advocacy during his incarceration. His mental health remained a point of contention, but it did not significantly impact his legal proceedings. In his final hours, Bourgeois requested a meal consisting of fried chicken, mashed potatoes, and a soft drink. He received visits from his legal team and spiritual advisors, but there were no major developments or significant statements made during these visits. Alfred Bourgeois was executed by lethal injection at the federal penitentiary in Terre Haute, Indiana, on December 11, 2019. He was pronounced dead at 6:45 p.m. His final words were, "I'm sorry for what I did, and I hope that everyone can forgive me." Lisa Montgomery. State of execution, Kansas. In 2004, Lisa Montgomery was convicted for the murder of a pregnant woman, Bobby Jo Stinnett, in Kansas. Montgomery strangled Stinnett and then cut the fetus from her womb, resulting in the death of the unborn child. Montgomery abducted the fetus, planning to raise it as her own. The crime occurred in the victim's home during a meeting arranged by Montgomery, who had posed as someone interested in purchasing a puppy from Stinnett's breeding business. The crime was especially shocking due to the brutal nature of the act, which involved killing a pregnant woman and cutting her unborn child from her womb. The premeditated nature of the crime, along with the vulnerability of the pregnant woman, added a chilling and emotionally heavy element to the case. Montgomery was arrested shortly after the crime, based on evidence linking her to the murder. Initially, she denied involvement, but later confessed during interrogation. Her confession, however, was controversial, with her defense team arguing it was coerced and that Montgomery suffered from mental illness at the time of the crime. The prosecution presented physical evidence linking Montgomery to the crime, including DNA evidence found at the scene. The victim's body and the unborn fetus were critical evidence. Montgomery's history of mental illness, including bipolar disorder and complex post-traumatic stress disorder, was central to her defense. Montgomery's trial took place in 2007, where she was convicted of first-degree murder and the death of the fetus. Despite her defense team's argument that she suffered from severe mental illness resulting from years of abuse, the jury convicted her, and she was sentenced to death. Appeals to reduce her sentence were unsuccessful, although her mental health remained a key issue throughout her legal proceedings. During her time on death row, Montgomery's mental health deteriorated significantly. She was described as suffering from severe psychiatric conditions, including psychosis and memory problems. Montgomery had little interaction with other inmates, spending much of her time isolated, and her behavior remained consistent with her previous struggles with mental health. While her legal team argued that her mental state should be considered as a mitigating factor, Montgomery did not undergo any significant personal transformation or engage in advocacy or public statements of remorse during her time on death row. Her mental health issues were often cited in legal proceedings, but she did not take part in any efforts toward rehabilitation. Montgomery's mental health was a significant factor throughout her trial and death row period. Experts testified that she suffered from severe mental illness and had a history of sexual abuse, which played a central role in her defense. She expressed some remorse, but her mental health issues were seen as major factors that limited her understanding of the full impact of her actions. In her final hours, Montgomery requested a vegetarian meal and a soft drink for her last meal. She received visits from her legal team and spiritual advisors, but no significant actions or statements were made during these visits. Lisa Montgomery was executed by lethal injection at the federal penitentiary in Terre Haute, Indiana, on January 13, 2021. She was pronounced dead at 1:31 a.m. Her final words were, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I hope you can forgive me." Corey Johnson. State of execution, Virginia. In 1992, Corey Johnson was convicted for his role in a drug-related triple murder in Virginia. Johnson and his co-defendants targeted 3 victims, 2 men and 1 woman, who were believed to be involved in a drug distribution operation. During a drug deal gone wrong, the victims were shot and killed. Johnson was accused of participating in the murders, although he claimed his involvement was minimal compared to his co-defendants. The crime was particularly disturbing due to its brutal nature and the involvement of multiple victims. The cold-blooded execution of 3 individuals during a drug deal added significant emotional weight to the case, especially given that the victims were targeted due to their connection to the drug trade. Johnson was arrested after evidence linked him to the crime scene. Initially, he confessed to the crime but later recanted, claiming his confession had been coerced. Despite his recantation, his confession played a pivotal role in the investigation and conviction. The prosecution presented a variety of evidence, including Johnson's confession, eyewitness testimony, and forensic evidence from the crime scene. The defense argued that the confession was unreliable and coerced, but the jury found the evidence compelling and convicted him of the murders. Johnson's trial took place in the mid-1990s, where a jury convicted him of 3 counts of murder. His defense claimed that he had been influenced by his co-defendants and did not directly participate in the killings, but this argument was rejected. Johnson was sentenced to death, and his appeals were unsuccessful. Despite claims of a coerced confession, his case continued to draw attention. During his time on death row, Johnson was described as calm and composed, with no significant incidents or disturbances. He did not show notable personal transformation or engage in major acts of redemption during his incarceration, though his legal team argued that he had expressed remorse. Johnson's mental health was not a major focus in his case, although his defense team argued that he had suffered from trauma and coercion. While he did express some level of remorse, the legal system did not fully acknowledge the extent of his remorse. In his final hours, Johnson requested a final meal consisting of fried chicken, mashed potatoes, and a soft drink. He received visits from his legal team and spiritual advisors, but did not make any significant statements or actions during these visits. Corey Johnson was executed by lethal injection at the federal penitentiary in Terre Haute, Indiana, on January 14, 2021. He was pronounced dead at 9:42 p.m. His final words were, "I apologize to the families of the victims, and I am sorry for my actions." Dustin Lee Honken. State of execution, Iowa. In 1993, Dustin Lee Honken was convicted for the murders of 5 people, including 2 children, in Iowa. The victims were witnesses to a drug operation involving Honken, and their deaths were believed to be part of an effort to eliminate them. Honken killed the victims and disposed of their bodies in a remote area, taking extreme measures to conceal the crime. The victims were later found, leading to Honken's arrest and subsequent charges for their deaths. The crime was particularly disturbing due to its cold-blooded nature, especially considering the deaths of 2 young children. The victims, who were innocent bystanders to Honken's drug operation, made the case even more emotionally heavy. The involvement of children added an especially shocking and tragic element to the murders. Honken was arrested after an extensive investigation involving forensic evidence and witness testimony. Initially, he denied his involvement, but later confessed to the killings during questioning. His confession played a critical role in securing his conviction. The prosecution presented physical evidence, including forensic analysis of the crime scene, bloodstains, and witness testimony. Honken's confession corroborated the evidence, solidifying the case against him. Honken's trial took place in the late 1990s. He was convicted of 5 counts of first-degree murder. The defense argued that his actions were influenced by his involvement in drugs and the pressures of the criminal world. Despite this defense, the jury convicted him, and he was sentenced to death. His appeals were unsuccessful, and the case remained a focal point of discussion due to its brutal nature. During his time on death row, Honken was described as calm and composed. There were no significant incidents or disturbances while incarcerated, and his behavior was generally considered orderly. Honken did not show notable personal transformation during his time on death row. Reports indicated that he did not engage in efforts to advocate for his case or express significant remorse in a public manner. His lack of public reflection on the crimes was noted by both the media and his legal team. While Honken's mental health was not a central issue in his case, reports suggested that his troubled upbringing and criminal background may have influenced his actions. He expressed some level of remorse, but the extent of his remorse was not fully acknowledged. In his final hours, Honken requested a final meal consisting of a steak, fries, and a soft drink. He received visits from his legal team and spiritual advisors, but there were no notable actions or statements made during these visits. Dustin Lee Honken was executed by lethal injection at the federal penitentiary in Terre Haute, Indiana, on January 17, 2021. He was pronounced dead at 6:37 p.m. His final words were, "I am sorry for the pain I've caused. I hope my victims are at peace." Wesley Ira Perkey. State of execution: Kansas. In 1998, Wesley Ira Perkey was convicted for the brutal murder of 16-year-old Jennifer Long in Kansas. Perkey kidnapped Jennifer, sexually assaulted her, and then murdered her by stabbing her multiple times. He disposed of her body in a nearby river, where it was later discovered. The nature of the crime, coupled with the victim's young age, made the case particularly emotionally charged and tragic. The crime was especially disturbing due to the victim's age. She was only 16 years old, and the brutal manner in which she was murdered. The kidnapping, assault, and subsequent murder of a young girl added a shocking element to the case, especially considering the cruelty with which she was treated. Perkey was arrested after investigators found evidence linking him to the crime, including his fingerprints at the scene and DNA evidence. Initially, he denied involvement, but he later confessed to the murder, providing details that were corroborated by the physical evidence at the crime scene. His confession played a crucial role in securing his conviction. The prosecution presented key evidence, including forensic analysis, DNA evidence, and Perkey's confession. His fingerprint was found on items at the scene, and the victim's blood was discovered in his vehicle. The evidence was overwhelming, leading to a conviction on first-degree murder charges. Perkey's trial took place in 2000, where a jury convicted him of first-degree murder and other charges related to the kidnapping and assault. His defense argued that his confession had been coerced and that he suffered from mental illness, but the jury found the evidence against him overwhelming. Perkey was sentenced to death, and his appeals were unsuccessful. During his time on death row, Perkey was described as having a calm demeanor. There were no major incidents or disturbances during his incarceration, although his mental health continued to be a concern. His defense team argued that he suffered from psychological issues, but there were no major actions or public statements from him that marked his time on death row. Perkey's mental health was a major point of contention throughout his trial and appeals. His defense team argued that he suffered from severe depression and psychosis. However, he showed little public remorse for his actions, and his mental health issues were not seen as sufficient to change his conviction or sentence. In his final hours, Perkey requested a final meal consisting of a steak, baked potatoes, and a soft drink. He received visits from his legal team and spiritual advisors, but no significant statements or actions were made during these visits. Wesley Ira Perkey was executed by lethal injection at the federal penitentiary in Terre Haute, Indiana, on July 16, 2020. He was pronounced dead at 8:19 p.m. His final words were, "I'm sorry for the pain I've caused, and I hope the family can find peace." Keith Dwayne Nelson. State of execution: Kansas. In 1999, Keith Dwayne Nelson committed a horrific crime that would shock the state of Kansas. He kidnapped, sexually assaulted, and murdered a 10-year-old girl, demonstrating an unimaginable level of brutality that targeted an innocent child. The crime was particularly heinous due to the victim's young age and the calculated nature of the assault. Nelson was apprehended shortly after the crime when compelling evidence linked him directly to the scene. During initial interrogations, he initially denied involvement but ultimately confessed to the crime. Forensic evidence, including DNA analysis, played a crucial role in connecting Nelson to the murder. Witness testimonies further corroborated the prosecution's case. Tried in 2000, Nelson was convicted of kidnapping, rape, and murder. Despite his defense team's attempts to argue coerced confession and mental health issues, the jury found him guilty and sentenced him to death. Multiple appeals were filed but ultimately failed to overturn the original conviction. Throughout his incarceration, Nelson remained relatively calm. No significant incidents were reported during his time in prison. His mental health was a point of discussion, with his legal team suggesting psychological issues, though these arguments did not sway the judicial process. On August 28, 2020, Nelson was executed by lethal injection at the federal penitentiary in Terre Haute, Indiana. He was pronounced dead at 9:27 p.m. For his final meal, he requested fried chicken, mashed potatoes, and a soft drink. In his final moments, Nelson received visits from his legal team and spiritual advisors. His last words reflected a semblance of remorse. "I'm sorry for what I've done. I hope the victim's family can find peace." Timothy McVeigh. State of execution: Oklahoma. On April 19, 1995, Timothy McVeigh was convicted for the Oklahoma City bombing, which resulted in 168 deaths, including numerous children. McVeigh, in retaliation for the federal government's actions during the Waco siege and the Ruby Ridge incident, detonated a truck bomb outside the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building. The explosion caused widespread devastation and loss of life, making it one of the deadliest acts of domestic terrorism in U.S. history. McVeigh was arrested shortly after the bombing when he was pulled over for a routine traffic violation. He was found carrying a weapon, which eventually led investigators to link him to the bombing. Initially silent, McVeigh later confessed to the bombing, claiming it was an act of revenge against the government. The prosecution presented eyewitness testimony, forensic evidence, and McVeigh's rental of the truck used in the bombing. His fingerprints were found on materials related to the attack, and witnesses placed him near the site of the explosion. McVeigh's trial in 1997 resulted in his conviction for first-degree murder and other related charges. Despite his defense's claim that he was influenced by extreme right-wing beliefs and anger over the Waco siege, the jury found the evidence overwhelming. He was sentenced to death, and his appeals were unsuccessful. During his time on death row, McVeigh was described as calm and cooperative. He did not engage in major incidents, and his behavior remained relatively quiet throughout his incarceration. McVeigh did not show notable personal transformation during his time on death row. He remained steadfast in his belief that his actions were justified, although he did express regret for the loss of innocent lives in some of his final statements. However, his lack of remorse for the crime remained a central aspect of his persona. McVeigh requested a final meal consisting of 2 beefsteaks, a serving of pizza, ice cream, and a soda. In his final hours, he received visits from his legal team and spiritual advisors. He spent his time reflecting on the case, though no major public statements or actions were made. Timothy McVeigh was executed by lethal injection at the federal penitentiary in Terre Haute, Indiana, on June 11, 2001. He was pronounced dead at 8:14 a.m. McVeigh's final words were, "I am the master of my fate, I am the captain of my soul." These were the final lines from the poem Invictus by William Ernest Henley. Juan Raul Garza. State of execution, Texas. In the 1990s, Juan Raul Garza was convicted for the murders of 3 individuals in Texas and Louisiana, which involved kidnapping, rape, and murder. Garza targeted his victims, abducted them, and subjected them to sexual assault before killing them. The bodies of the victims were disposed of in various locations across multiple states. His violent and premeditated actions made this a particularly gruesome and emotional case. The crime was emotionally heavy due to the brutal nature of the murders, including the sexual assault of the victims and their subsequent deaths. The fact that Garza targeted multiple victims in a similar fashion heightened the horror of the case, particularly considering the vulnerability of the individuals involved. Garza was arrested after evidence linked him to the murders, including forensic and physical evidence found at the crime scenes. Initially, he denied his involvement but later confessed to the crimes, providing crucial details that played a key role in the investigation. His confession included chilling accounts of the murders and the violence he inflicted. The prosecution presented physical evidence, including DNA and forensic evidence from the crime scenes. Garza's confession, which detailed the murders, corroborated the physical evidence, and his fingerprints were found at key locations associated with the victims. Garza was convicted of multiple counts of murder in the mid-1990s, with a jury sentencing him to death. Despite his defense team's arguments citing his troubled background and claims of mental illness, the jury found the evidence against him overwhelming. The trial and subsequent appeals were marked by controversy, particularly surrounding his mental health status and whether it should have been considered a mitigating factor. During his time on death row, Garza exhibited calm and composed behavior. He did not engage in major incidents or disruptions, although his demeanor remained consistent with his prior violent behavior. Garza did not show significant personal transformation during his time on death row. His legal team and family claimed that he had developed a sense of remorse, but these claims were not publicly backed by any notable actions such as advocacy or public statements. Garza's mental health was a contentious issue during his trial and death row period. His defense team argued that he had a history of mental illness, but this was not sufficient to alter his conviction or sentence. While some reports suggested Garza expressed remorse, it was not a major factor in his final days. In his final hours, Garza requested a final meal consisting of a steak, French fries, and a soft drink. He received visits from his legal team and spiritual advisors, but there were no significant actions or statements made during these visits. Juan Raul Garza was executed by lethal injection at the federal penitentiary in Terre Haute, Indiana, on June 19, 2001. He was pronounced dead at 6 p.m. His final words were, "I am sorry for the harm I have caused. I hope the victims' families can find peace." Ronald A. Gray. State of execution, United States, military. From 1986 to 1987, Ronald A. Gray was convicted of multiple murders and rapes while serving in the U.S. Army. Stationed at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, Gray was involved in the brutal sexual assault and murder of several women, as well as the rape of others. His victims were often young women, and the murders were particularly violent and disturbing. The crimes were emotionally heavy due to their brutal nature, particularly the rapes and murders, and the vulnerability of the victims. The fact that the perpetrator was a soldier, trusted to uphold the law and serve his country, made his actions particularly shocking and disturbing to the public. Gray was arrested in 1988 after investigations linked him to the murders. He confessed to several of the crimes during interrogation, and his confession was pivotal in securing his conviction. His statements provided chilling details about the murders, which were corroborated by forensic evidence. The prosecution presented physical evidence, including DNA evidence, linking Gray to the victims. Additionally, his confession, along with forensic evidence such as the victim's belongings found in his possession, strengthened the case against him. Gray was court-martialed by the military in 1988. The jury convicted him of multiple counts of murder, rape, and other related crimes. His defense team argued that he had been suffering from psychological issues and sought a reduced sentence, but the court sentenced him to death. The trial was controversial due to the involvement of the military justice system and the rarity of military executions. During his time on death row, Gray was described as calm and relatively cooperative. There were no major incidents during his incarceration, although he remained a subject of interest due to being the first military execution in decades. Gray did not show notable personal transformation during his time on death row. While he expressed some remorse for his actions, it was not accompanied by significant public efforts to redeem himself or advocate for others. Gray's mental health was a key issue in his defense. His attorneys argued that he suffered from serious psychological problems, which they linked to his violent actions. However, his remorse for the victims was not clearly evident in his final statements or behavior during his time on death row. In his final hours, Gray requested a final meal consisting of fried chicken, mashed potatoes, and a soft drink. He received visits from his legal team and spiritual advisors, but there were no significant actions or statements taken during these visits. Ronald A. Gray was executed by lethal injection on June 19, 2001. His execution marked the first military execution authorized since 1961. He was pronounced dead at 7:20 a.m. Gray's final words were, "I am sorry for the pain I caused to the victims and their families." Lewis Jones, Jr. State of execution, Texas. In 1995, Lewis Jones, Jr. was convicted for the kidnapping, rape, and murder of U.S. Army Private Tracy McBride. Jones abducted McBride while she was waiting for a ride on a highway near Killeen, Texas. He then drove her to a remote location, where he sexually assaulted her before strangling her to death. Her body was discovered days later in a field. Jones' actions were brutal and premeditated, leading to his conviction and subsequent execution. The crime was particularly shocking due to the violent and premeditated nature of the act, and the victim was a young woman who was serving in the military. The fact that the crime involved both kidnapping and sexual assault added a chilling element, making the case especially emotionally heavy for those involved and the public. Jones was arrested after investigators linked him to the crime through evidence found in his vehicle and at the crime scene. He initially denied involvement but later confessed to the crime during questioning. His confession was pivotal in securing his conviction, though his defense team later argued that the confession was coerced. The prosecution presented forensic evidence, including DNA analysis, that linked Jones to the crime. Eyewitness testimony placed him near the scene, and his confession provided critical details about the crime, confirming the physical evidence and strengthening the case against him. Jones was convicted of capital murder in 1997. His defense attempted to argue that his confession had been coerced and that he had a history of mental health issues, but these claims were rejected. The jury convicted him, and he was sentenced to death. Despite several appeals, including arguments based on his mental health, the conviction and sentence were upheld. During his time on death row, Jones was reportedly calm and cooperative. He did not engage in major incidents or disruptions during his incarceration, and his behavior was generally described as orderly. Jones did not show notable personal transformation during his time on death row. Though there were claims from his attorneys that he had expressed remorse, there were no significant actions or public efforts at redemption or advocacy. Jones' mental health was a central issue in his defense, with his legal team citing a history of psychological problems. However, his remorse for the crime was not publicly apparent during his time on death row. Some reports suggested he expressed regret, but this was not a significant theme during his incarceration. In his final hours, Jones requested a final meal consisting of steak, French fries, and a soft drink. He received visits from his legal team and spiritual advisors, but there were no significant actions or statements made by him during these visits. Louis Jones Jr. was executed by lethal injection at the state penitentiary in Huntsville, Texas, on March 18, 2003. He was pronounced dead at 6:20 p.m. His final words were, "I want to apologize to the McBride family for what I have done." These were the final words, final meals, and final moments of all the rapists executed in the United States of America. Drop your thoughts below. If you believe stories like these deserve to be remembered, subscribe to this channel. This is Sin, Crime and Silence Records.